A single frame anomaly deep in the data stream from the Webb telescope's infrared array, barely noticeable, almost elegant. For weeks it was dismissed as calibration noise, a technical echo in the detectors. But then the flicker became a pattern. It repeated precisely every 29 hours and 11 minutes, the same frequency recorded years ago when 3I Atlas first passed through our solar system. Only this time the pattern was stronger, sharper, closer. Scientists at the European Southern Observatory confirmed what the data suggested. The object wasn't just reflecting sunlight anymore, it was emitting something, radiation, but not thermal. A narrowband pulse, controlled, deliberate, and that's when NASA reactivated their deep scan protocol. If you're watching this, stay with me and hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell if you want to keep up with this cosmic mystery, because what they found next is something no one expected. The object's new emissions don't just break the known laws of physics, they interact with us. Across several observatories, the readings came in almost simultaneously. The object's albedo, the measure of how much light it reflects, had nearly tripled in less than 10 days. That shouldn't be possible, not unless its surface was actively changing composition. In the most recent sequence of Webb imagery, 3I Atlas no longer appeared as a static body of rock and dust. Its outer layers had become translucent. Beneath them, a faint lattice shimmered, delicate, geometric, almost crystalline. The analysts described it as structural reconfiguration, but the term barely captures what was unfolding. The object was rebuilding itself, molecule by molecule, and buried inside that transformation was something even stranger: motion from within. At first, astronomers thought the internal movement might be debris, dust trapped inside the field of view, but the movement was synchronized, hundreds of faint lines of light threading across the object's interior, spiraling toward its poles. Then, at the exact midpoint of its rotation, those lines pulsed once, like a network exchanging information. When that first pulse reached the detectors, every major space-based observatory, Webb, Hubble, even the Solar Orbiter, recorded a brief but measurable electromagnetic spike. It was uniform across frequencies from radio to X-ray, a single, planetary-scale synchronization event. The signal lasted exactly 7 seconds, and then the object went dark. That moment, the blackout, changed everything. Because what happened next wasn't cosmic, it was local. Roughly 3 hours after the pulse, magnetometers on Earth began to twitch. Subtle, but global. The readings came from observatories in Chile, Alaska, Siberia, and the Indian Ocean, each recording a small but distinct fluctuation in Earth's magnetic field, perfectly aligned with the timing of the blackout. NASA denied correlation. The European Space Agency called it coincidence. But internal reports, later leaked through encrypted research forums, suggested that the agencies were far from dismissive. They were alarmed. The data hinted at something uncomfortably specific. Earth's magnetic field had momentarily resonated with the pulse. That shouldn't happen. Interstellar radiation is too weak, too distant. And yet, there it was. Our planet humming in tune with something millions of kilometers away. Scientists at the SETI Institute analysed the pulse pattern, comparing it to past anomalies, vast radio bursts, cosmic microwave distortions, even solar flare harmonics. Nothing matched. The waveform wasn't random, it carried structure, binary intervals embedded within the noise. One of them described it as a repeating language of ratios, like a voice encoded in physics. And then came the acceleration. When first detected, 3I Atlas was moving predictably, a near-stable elliptical path coasting through the inner solar system. But just after the pulse, the object began to shift. Its velocity changed, not drastically, but with unmistakable intention. The new trajectory placed it on a slow, steady curve toward Mars. The official statement from NASA was cautious, calling it a minor perturbation possibly caused by outgassing. But private analysts weren't convinced. The shift wasn't random. It followed a series of micro-adjustments, each correction too precise to be natural, as if the object were aligning itself. Meanwhile, on Earth, the effects continued. Deep-sea magnetometers in the Pacific began picking up low-frequency oscillations, barely audible hums, identical to the 29-hour cycle detected in the telescope data. Seismographs recorded faint tremors, rhythmic but harmless. Even satellite telemetry began to distort at predictable intervals. Some researchers began to whisper a theory too absurd to publish, that 3i Atlas wasn't simply emitting energy, but tuning space itself. Every pulse, every shift, every harmonic event appeared to bring it closer to resonance with planetary fields. And then, one night, the solar orbiter recorded a visual anomaly unlike anything seen before. For a brief instant, the region around 3i Atlas shimmered with light. Not reflected, but emitted outward in perfect concentric rings. It resembled an expanding field, a wave moving faster than its own origin. The outer rings touched the edge of Mars' magnetosphere. The sensors went offline. When they rebooted, Mars looked different. Not physically, but magnetically. The planet's weak magnetic field, long thought dead, had spiked in strength by 11%. No known phenomenon could explain that, unless the field hadn't been reactivated by internal processes at all, but by contact. Inside NASA's Deep Archive database, a term resurfaced from decades of forgotten analysis. Mutual induction. The concept described two electromagnetic bodies that, when resonating at the same frequency, begin to exchange energy directly. Like two tuning forks vibrating each other into motion. The idea was theoretical. Until now. If 3i Atlas was emitting at the correct resonance, and Mars was within its harmonic reach, then what we were witnessing wasn't an anomaly, it was activation. And if the same resonance reached Earth, that's when danger stopped being hypothetical. Because once mutual induction occurs, it doesn't stop. It spreads. Resonance seeks balance, and balance means synchronization. That's exactly what the instruments are showing tonight. Every field, every orbit, every magnetic system in this solar system is starting to hum in time. By the time NASA officially acknowledged the changes, the resonance had already spread far beyond prediction. It wasn't just magnetic alignment anymore, it was structural. Low Earth orbit satellites began to experience something no model could explain. Synchronized oscillations. Gyroscopes rotated fractionally out of phase, then realigned on their own. Communication arrays twisted ever so slightly toward the same point in the sky. The coordinates of 3i Atlas. Every machine built to track the object seemed to remember it. The data frightened engineers more than they were willing to admit. Instruments that should have been blind were now reacting like they had memory. It was as though the very act of observing 3i Atlas had rewritten the systems that observed it. Inside NASA's Deep Space Network, a red flag event was logged under the codename Umbra. The entry was simple. Global synchronization, non-random, initiate containment. The word containment didn't make sense at first. You can't contain a gravitational field. You can't isolate resonance. But that was the order. Umbra wasn't a public program, it didn't even exist in official budgets. It was a continuation of something older, an unfinished branch of Prometheus, the classified project built decades ago to monitor extrasolar anomalies. The instructions were clear. Shut down all active telemetry connected to 3i Atlas. Disable transmission relays. Sever observation loops. But you can't stop seeing something once you've already seen it. Even offline, the instruments kept responding. The first reports of visual anomalies came within hours. Civilians began uploading footage to astronomy forums. Faint spirals of light forming high in the atmosphere, stretching from pole to pole like auroral filaments. At first, scientists dismissed them as reflections from solar storms. But these spirals didn't follow solar cycles. They followed the same 29-hour rhythm. Every time the object pulsed, Earth answered. In infrared imaging, the patterns became visible even during daylight, thin ribbons of electromagnetic disturbance tracing geometric arcs across the planet. From orbit, they resembled circuits. From the ground, they looked like storms that refused to move. Meteorologists called them static gyres, a new atmospheric phenomenon. But inside Umbra, the description was different. Resonant induction complete, atmospheric medium synchronized. Meaning, the sky itself was now vibrating at the same frequency as the object. And with that synchronization came consequence. Seismographs began recording anomalies again, just as they had during the last encounter. The tremors weren't tectonic. They were harmonic. Pressure waves moving through the crust, repeating at perfect intervals. Each pulse slightly stronger than the last, Each one timed exactly to the new cycle of 3I Atlas's internal light sequence. When researchers mapped the epicenters, they noticed something unsettling. The tremors were forming a pattern, a grid of equidistant nodes spanning the planet's surface. When overlaid with global latitude data, the lines matched the energy distribution pattern of Earth's magnetic field. It was as if something was scanning the planet. One scientist described it perfectly in a private note later leaked online. "It's like the object is taking our measurement." And then came the first blackout. At precisely 03:11 UTC, the same timestamp as the previous synchronization event, every deep space monitoring station between 30 degrees and 60 degrees latitude lost power for 7 minutes. Backup systems failed, data buffers wiped clean. When the networks came back online, every relay had the same incomplete entry. Signal inversion detected. For those 7 minutes, Earth wasn't receiving the signal, it was transmitting. After that, Umbra shifted from observation to lockdown. An encrypted transmission went out to every partner agency. Suspend external communications. Classify all 3I Atlas telemetry as restricted under quantum interference protocols. But silence only made the event louder. Civilian observatories around the world, independent astronomers, amateurs with home-built rigs, began noticing something extraordinary. The object was no longer alone. Within the field surrounding 3I Atlas, faint reflective traces had appeared. Not debris, not lens artifacts, but smaller structures orbiting in perfect formation, at least 9 distinct points of light, each one pulsing in synchronization, each one matching the object's wavelength pattern. An astronomer from Kyoto was the first to map their movement precisely. His conclusions stunned even seasoned physicists. The objects weren't orbiting at random. They were aligning into a shape, a lattice, identical to the one recently discovered in Earth's atmospheric resonance map. For the first time, the alignment wasn't just theoretical, it was visible. Something, whatever intelligence or mechanism governed 3I Atlas, was building symmetry between itself and our planet. By the third day, the hum returned. Those who had experienced it years ago recognized it instantly. The low vibration beneath sound, the one that feels like it comes from within your bones. It didn't interfere with machines this time. It interfered with thought. Subjects in magnetically shielded facilities began reporting identical dreams, vast fields of light, repeating geometry, rhythmic pulses. Every description was the same, regardless of language or culture. They saw the same structure, the same luminous network stretching through darkness, and always at the center, the same sphere of silver light. One report from an ESA neuroscientist described it like this: "I think it's communicating, but not through symbols, through pattern. It's showing us the framework of something alive." When asked what the object wanted, he said nothing. He simply drew a spiral, slowly, perfectly, and whispered, "It's trying to finish what it started." Meanwhile, the world above him began to change. Satellite imagery showed faint electromagnetic halos around every continent, forming at the boundaries where Earth's crust conducted most strongly. Subduction zones, rift valleys, mid-ocean ridges. They glowed faintly in the infrared spectrum, invisible to the naked eye but eerily uniform. It was as though the planet's energy grid had awakened, and 3I Atlas was directing it. Theories began to split. Some claimed the resonance was stabilizing our field, repairing the slow decay of Earth's magnetosphere. Others saw something darker, a preparation phase, because in every previous observation cycle, the pattern ended the same way, with silence. And silence now was approaching again. The hum had grown louder each day, but today it stopped. The silence didn't last long, only 47 seconds, but in cosmic terms it was an eternity. Every active instrument on Earth registered the same moment of absolute stillness. No magnetic flux, no radiation, no background resonance. The universe itself seemed to exhale, waiting for whatever came next. Then, without warning, the data returned. But it wasn't the same. The signals streaming from 3I Atlas had inverted polarity, reversing every known spectral index, flipping positive charges to negative, reversing waveform direction. It was as though the object had turned itself inside out. Infrared scans captured something even stranger. The object's once solid outline had dissolved into a translucent sphere, the outer shell replaced by waves of alternating density, pulsing fields of matter and antimatter oscillating in perfect sequence. Its glow was now deeper, redder, almost biological. A team at the European Space Operations Centre described the phenomenon as coherent quantum reformation. In simpler terms, 3I Atlas wasn't changing. It was becoming something else. And whatever that transformation was, it was radiating through the solar system. At NASA's Umbra facility, the telemetry, engineers stared at their monitors as planetary models began to glitch. Earth's upper atmosphere, once calm, now exhibited vertical electrical discharges stretching beyond 100 kilometers, massive silent pillars of energy rising straight through the ionosphere, connecting sky to space. They weren't lightning, they were structured. When mapped globally, the discharges formed exact overlays of Earth's Layfield network, the same grid that mirrored the object's internal lattice structure, each pulse aligned perfectly with the next, separated by intervals of 29 hours, the same rhythm, the same code. Dr. Helena Voron, lead physicist on the Umbra Synchronization Task Force, broke the silence during the emergency briefing. "It's not a coincidence," she said quietly. "This isn't a message we're intercepting. It's a sequence we're participating in." Her words were met with disbelief. But then the next pulse arrived. Sensors in orbit captured the moment. A massive coronal wave, undetectable to human eyes, spread outward from the object at near light speed. When it reached Earth, the planet responded in kind. Satellite data showed the ionosphere flexing like a living membrane, rippling outward with the pulse. The Earth wasn't just absorbing energy, it was mirroring it. For the first time in recorded history, the planet's magnetic field and 3I Atlas's emission waveform became synchronized, two frequencies blending into one. That's when the alarms began to sound. Across the northern hemisphere, the auroras intensified beyond any natural range. They spread far past the poles, bleeding into the equator, forming luminous arcs that carved intricate symbols across the sky, patterns repeating, self-correcting, expanding. From orbit, the Earth looked like a circuit board. From the ground, it looked like prophecy. And then the radiation readings changed. Instead of dispersing, the incoming energy began to focus. It no longer radiated outward into space, it bent inward toward the surface, concentrating at key magnetic nodes. The largest concentration point, the Pacific Ocean. Ships at sea reported compasses spinning uncontrollably, digital instruments freezing. Then came the hum again, deeper this time, audible underwater. Submarine cables began vibrating, transmitting harmonic frequencies through fiber lines across continents. Power grids surged. The global internet experienced synchronized latency waves, pulsing every 29 hours on the second. Every system, digital or organic, was resonating in unison. Inside Umbra, data visualization teams began overlaying all known readings, magnetosphere maps, seismic charts, atmospheric models, and the latest optical data from the Webb telescope. When combined, they revealed a pattern no one had anticipated. 3I Atlas and Earth weren't just synchronizing, they were aligning. The field geometries formed a three-dimensional resonance, network between the two bodies, like paired neurons firing across a synaptic bridge. Each pulse wasn't random, it was information, instruction. One researcher described it as biological. Another whispered what everyone was already thinking. It's building something. On the sixth pulse, seismic activity spiked, but not in the way earthquakes usually behave. Instead of releasing energy, the ground seemed to absorb it. Brief tremors that reversed in direction, pressure waves moving upward, not downward. Thermal imaging satellites confirmed localized heating beneath major fault lines, precisely where the electromagnetic currents converged. Something beneath the crust was reacting. The most intense readings came from the Tonga Trench, where temperature rose by nearly 10 degrees in under an hour. The pattern extended across the entire Pacific Rim, Japan, Chile, New Zealand, California, each point lighting up in perfect resonance. The energy wasn't dispersing randomly, it was converging into a massive global loop. Dr. Voron stood in the command room as the live data projected onto the screen. Earth's magnetic field lines glowed with eerie symmetry, coiling around the planet like luminous vines. 3i Atlas hovered at the perfect harmonic point, its field pulsing in rhythm, the two frequencies indistinguishable. She spoke quietly, almost to herself. "It's not scanning. It's mapping." One of the engineers turned to her, pale. "Mapping what?" She didn't answer. But in that moment the next image appeared, a composite of the combined emissions, rendered as a 3D projection. The form was unmistakable. It wasn't planetary, it wasn't random, it was anatomical. A lattice resembling the structure of neural tissue stretching from 3i Atlas through the resonance bridge to Earth's magnetic field, like two hemispheres of the same brain. Silence filled the control room. Nobody spoke, nobody could. Because if that pattern was correct, then the resonance wasn't communication between two objects, it was integration. Umbra's last recorded transmission before the blackout captured one final message from Dr. Voron herself. If we are part of the same network, then the danger isn't that it's affecting us. The danger is that it's remembering us. After that, the feed went dark. For several minutes after the blackout, there was no data, no signal, no sound. Just the soft hum of servers idling in standby and the slow pulse of emergency lights painting the walls red. When the systems rebooted, everything looked different. Telemetry streams that should have been random noise were now perfectly ordered. Waveforms so symmetrical they looked artificial. The Earthside transmitters were offline, yet packets of data were still flowing inward, arriving from nowhere. It was as though the network had developed an internal rhythm of its own. The few engineers left. In the Umbra control room stared at the monitors. Each screen displayed the same repeating pattern, a sine wave oscillating around a central line of perfect balance. Every 5 seconds the waveform brightened, forming an eye-shaped curve that pulsed once before fading. No one could explain it. No one even tried, because deep down they all knew. This wasn't interference, it was intention. Outside, the world began to respond. GPS satellites drifted from their assigned orbits, only to correct themselves in coordinated arcs, as if guided by an unseen hand. Communication satellites realigned their antennas toward a single point beyond Mars, transmitting on a frequency never programmed into their systems. One operator tried to override the orientation protocols. The satellites ignored every command. Moments later, his console printed a short string of characters. 29 joules, ready a timer, counting down. At first, the team thought it was a glitch, an internal sync cycle looping in error. But when they cross-checked, the same countdown appeared across every network node on the planet. Even civilian hardware, phones, routers, drones, were pinging the same invisible clock, 29 hours until the next pulse. The effect on the human nervous system began subtly. Subjects inside magnetically shielded facilities reported flashes of light behind closed eyelids, rhythmic sensations in their chest matching the object's known frequency. At first, doctors called it stress, but EEG readings told a different story. Every test subject's brain waves began to harmonize. Individual alpha and theta bands, normally chaotic, merged into a single coherent oscillation. The human mind was tuning to the same pattern that had synchronized the planet. It wasn't possession, it was resonance, and with resonance came memory. Patients began describing identical dreams, a sphere of light floating above an endless ocean, lines of silver geometry rising from the water like neural branches, and somewhere inside it, a low voice whispering not in words but in intervals. "You're part of it," they said in their sleep. "You always were." When Umbra's psychological division reviewed the recordings, they found something extraordinary. Every subject, regardless of language, reproduced the same tone when speaking the word "it." A tone measured precisely at 783 Hz, the Schumann frequency of Earth's magnetic field. The line between biological and planetary resonance had collapsed. The human mind had entered the circuit. Dr. Voron's last surviving log captured her realization in a single breath. The brain is an antenna, the planet is a resonator. Together they complete the loop, she paused. That means whatever's broadcasting us isn't out there anymore. It's inside the signal path that defines us. Outside, phenomena multiplied. Over the Pacific, clouds formed perfect concentric spirals, identical in structure to the interference rings first seen around 3i Atlas. They didn't move with the wind, they hovered. Air traffic reported turbulence inside invisible corridors of electromagnetic pressure, slicing the upper atmosphere into harmonic bands. Meanwhile, auroral light returned, bright, pulsing, mathematical, each flare lasting exactly 47 seconds before fading into violet haze. The sky looked alive again. In Chile, a radio telescope captured the first direct transmission since the blackout. It wasn't noise, it was voice, if voice could exist without language, a modulation of frequencies rising and falling like breath. When translated into spectrogram form, the waveform resembled a fingerprint. When overlaid on 3i Atlas's internal lattice pattern, it fit perfectly. The object wasn't just signalling anymore, it was responding. At 0400 UTC, a single line of data appeared on every observatory's console simultaneously. The text was identical worldwide, regardless of operating system or encryption layer. Echo confirmed. Source local. No one understood what it meant until one of the field stations compared timestamps. The latest emission from 3i Atlas had been recorded after the Earth-based response, meaning the planet had transmitted first. Something here had initiated the pulse. Dr. Voron's team ran the numbers again and again, each time reaching the same conclusion. The object wasn't leading the resonance anymore, it was following it. Something on Earth, perhaps deep within its electromagnetic core, had begun guiding the synchronization. The realization settled like cold fog through the command center. For the first time, the object was no longer the anomaly. We were. Civilian instruments soon confirmed what Umbra feared. The Schumann resonance, Earth's natural electromagnetic heartbeat, had doubled in amplitude. For the first time in recorded history, it produced a harmonic overtone, an entirely new frequency layered atop the old one, oscillating at precisely 1426 Hz, mathematically perfect, artificial. It was a second voice in the planetary chorus, and that voice sounded human. The pulse cycle shortened from 29 hours to 28 hours, 59 minutes and 59 seconds, 1 second closer to perfect synchrony. Umbra's supercomputers plotted the curve forward. At the current rate, full alignment would occur in 12 days. Beyond that point, no simulation could predict outcome. The models failed, spiraling into infinite recursion. The software froze, then displayed a single word before shutting down. Merge. When the next pulse came, the effect was visible even to the naked eye. The entire night sky shimmered as though reflected on water. Stars doubled, then folded back into single points of impossible brightness. Compasses stopped spinning, they simply pointed upward. And then, for the briefest moment, gravity itself flickered. Not enough to lift a pebble, just enough to remind the world that everything we thought was stable could still be rewritten. Inside Umbra, power failed one final time. The last camera feed captured the scientists standing in absolute stillness, their faces illuminated by the faint red glow of emergency lighting, eyes wide but calm, listening. Because in that silence, a new sound was rising. Not from the sky, not from the ground, from within. The pulse had found its echo, and this time, the echo was us. At first the changes were almost tender, little adjustments in the fabric of reality, small enough to dismiss as fatigue or faulty instruments. Clocks disagreed by a fraction of a second, then corrected themselves without human input. Lasers used for distance measurements returned values too perfect, decimals vanishing into whole numbers as if space itself had rounded the equation. Light, time, and gravity were beginning to cooperate. Across observatories, scientists reported that lenses were no longer focusing outward. Every mirror, every reflective surface seemed to lean infinitesimally toward Earth's magnetic equator, as if drawn by invisible geometry. The planet's magnetic field wasn't just stronger, it was directional, a compass pointing not north, but inward. Dr. Voron's successor, a soft-spoken mathematician named Elias Cade, described it best in his only surviving broadcast. It feels as though the universe has remembered its own center, and we're standing in it. Then the feed fractured. 3 hours later, satellites began transmitting imagery no algorithm could interpret. At first glance, it looked like solar glare, a wash of golden static. But when slowed and filtered through deep field spectrum analysis, the image revealed structure, vast hexagonal columns of light stretching between the object and Earth, millions of kilometers long. They weren't beams, they were corridors. Each corridor pulsed once every 29 hours, light folding through itself in recursive patterns that defied causality. It wasn't travelling through space, it was skipping across time. Every pulse arrived on Earth before it left the object. The effect spread across instruments like a contagion. Atomic clocks began desynchronizing, not randomly but rhythmically. 1 second slow, 1 second fast, the same heartbeat everywhere. When plotted, the pattern formed a waveform identical to human EEG data in deep REM sleep. Time itself was dreaming. Civilians started noticing it too. Birds migrating off-season, tides arriving twice in a day, shadows bending slightly away from their sources. Nothing dramatic, just wrong. And then came the auditory anomalies. Tones no device was playing, music with no origin. People described it as a chord held under reality, a sound you could feel in the spine. Hospitals filled with patients complaining of resonant vertigo, their inner ears vibrating in rhythm with a pulse they couldn't name. Every one of them tapped the same tempo when asked to describe it. 29 beats. News anchors called it the loop. Physicists called it impossible. Umbra called it Phase 2. Inside the agency's remaining command center, the walls flickered with residual static. Video feeds showed 3i Atlas no longer as an object but as a bloom of light, a sphere dissolving into threads that spread outward like roots seeking soil. Those threads connected directly with the corridors of light seen earlier, linking object to planet in a mesh of living energy. No one could decide if it was reaching out or taking hold. The power grids followed next. Frequency regulators on every continent began to oscillate exactly 1 Hz above standard, the same deviation measured in the Schumann resonance weeks before. Every generator, every circuit, every living nervous system now pulsed in harmonic unison. Elias Cade's final note captured the terror beneath the beauty. It's too organised to be collapse. It's construction. At 2:47 UTC, the corridors brightened. For 7 minutes, the entire night side of Earth glowed faintly blue. During that window, cameras stopped recording. Data buffers overwrote themselves with strings of repeating binary 10 to exosia 10, millions of lines long, no delimiters, no corruption. When decoded through ASCII translation, the sequence rendered one word: stabilize. Then came the stillness. No wind, no electromagnetic background noise, even the constant hiss of the universe, the cosmic microwave radiation itself, flattened to silence. For the first time since creation, space went quiet. In that silence, human perception changed. Time slowed to the rhythm of heartbeat. Seconds stretched. Thoughts lingered. People could feel distance, the literal measure of space, breathing. Buildings, oceans, clouds, all seemed to inhale and exhale together. Far above, the Webb telescope, operating on backup power, captured the impossible. The hexagonal corridors connecting Earth to 3i Atlas were no longer beams, they were reflections. Each one showed an image of Earth itself, inverted and shimmering, as though the planet were surrounded by infinite mirrors stacked through dimension. Light from the sun entered one side and never came out. It folded endlessly between reflections, creating brightness without source, an energy loop. That's when the gravitational data spiked. A faint pull, measurable but undeniable, drawing the moon closer by fractions of a kilometre. It wasn't tidal, it was directional, toward the mirror field. In those moments, scientists realised what 3i Atlas had done. It had turned the solar system into a resonant cavity, a cosmic instrument tuned for coherence. Every planet, every field, every living system now vibrated as one harmonic body. The object wasn't just influencing gravity, it was redefining it. The next transmission, from Umbra, contained only environmental telemetry, barometric pressure stable, ion flux normal, radiation negligible. Everything read safe, ordinary, and yet the human body disagreed. Pulse rates dropped globally. Heartbeats slowed until doctors thought equipment was malfunctioning. People reported dreaming while awake, seeing light bloom behind their eyelids, hearing whispers in the hum of electronics. Even in deep sleep, no one felt alone. For the first time in history, humanity shared a single collective physiological rhythm. Across billions of bodies, one pulse. 29 hours, exactly. The hum returned, low and deep, vibrating through oceans and air alike. It didn't feel mechanical anymore. It felt alive. Elias Cade's last entry, barely audible through static, was transmitted minutes before contact was lost forever. The resonance has crossed the threshold. Gravity is no longer binding matter, it's binding thought. We're becoming part of the equation. He hesitated, then added softly, "If this is danger, it's the kind that dreams before it wakes." After that, the screen faded to black. And somewhere, beyond the static, the hum exhaled once more, a slow, deliberate sound that felt like the heartbeat of something vast and listening. When the hum returned, it no longer sounded external. People heard it inside their breath, inside the pause between heartbeats. Cities glowed at night without power, their concrete surfaces faintly bioluminescent, as if stone remembered sunlight. Radio static carried patterns, soft, Morse-like ticks that no antenna transmitted. Everywhere, the universe seemed to be speaking in rhythm instead of words. In laboratories, laser interferometers began recording gravitational waves that behaved like language, paired pulses, equal and opposite, arranging themselves in grammatical symmetry. Physicists watching the live feed described it as syntax made of curvature, each crest balanced by its twin trough, a sentence written across space-time itself. The waveform spelled one repeated interval, 29 hours, 00 minutes. But there was a second modulation hidden beneath it, smaller, faster, like punctuation. When decoded into binary, it produced a looping sequence that translated roughly to "signal stable, await coherence." It read like an instruction. At the same time, magnetic mapping satellites began tracing vast filaments of current running through the planet's upper mantle. They weren't new, they had always been there. Only now they pulsed in perfect time with the object's emission. When overlaid with atmospheric data, the pattern resembled neural pathways, each continent a lobe, each ocean a synapse. The planet was functioning like a brain preparing to think. And then came the first cognitive anomaly. During the 14th cycle, researchers in separate countries reported simultaneous thought interference, words forming in their minds that were not their own. Short phrases, gentle, neutral, impossible to forget. Alignment achieved. Observation complete. Continue within. Brain scans showed synchronized bursts of activity across temporal lobes, identical in shape to the magnetic field's new waveform. The human mind had entered the lattice. UMBRA's final emergency directive, Code Viridis, ordered the disconnection of every network device capable of feedback amplification. But the order came too late. The resonance had already leapt beyond machinery. Electrical cables hummed even when severed. Copper carried memory like living tissue. Sound systems turned silent, then emitted faint whispers of harmonic overtones, the same ones measured in human EEGs during deep dream cycles. A single line appeared on the central monitor before it shut down completely. Feedback loop sustained. After that, there were no more commands, only listening. Out in orbit, Webb's last operational camera captured the most detailed image yet of 3i Atlas. What had once been a sphere was now a translucent shell filled with moving light, folding in spirals too complex to model. Each rotation revealed lattices that mirrored the electromagnetic map of Earth seen from above. Inside that shell, something flickered, deliberate, recursive, alive. When the data was reconstructed into motion, it showed the object breathing, its radius expanding and contracting in precise rhythm with the Schumann resonance. Every expansion coincided with a subtle rise in Earth's magnetic field. Every contraction matched a collective drop in global heart rate. The object and the planet were sharing circulation. People began to sleep longer, not from exhaustion, but necessity. Dreams stretched for hours that felt like days, landscapes repeating with geometric precision. Those who recorded their EEs found identical structures, stacked waves forming a lattice pattern, the same architecture visible in the sky. It was as if consciousness itself was being drawn into a larger field of equilibrium. No one called it fear anymore. It felt like gravity made gentle, like being carried. A broadcast leaked from the Geneva array 43 hours before all transmissions ceased. It wasn't official communication, It was a private voice memo left running by a technician named Amani Ree. The energy flux has stabilized. It's not destroying anything. It's rewriting coherence. Everything wants to move together. You can feel it, like a tide under the skin. Maybe danger was just our word for change. Her voice faded into the background hum, indistinguishable from it. Then, something extraordinary. During the 15th cycle, gravitational sensors recorded a 0-point fluctuation across the entire planet. For 7 seconds, weight lost definition. Objects neither fell nor floated, they simply paused. The effect was global yet invisible, a silent contraction of time itself. When normal, conditions returned, satellites confirmed a measurable shift in orbital vectors. Earth had moved, fractionally closer to 3i Atlas. It was no longer just resonance, it was migration. Across the sky, new auroral bands formed. They weren't colours, but gradients of perception, light that changed hue depending on who observed it. Every witness saw a different shade, yet when described, the words matched perfectly. Language itself had begun synchronizing meaning. On the 16th cycle, telescopes recorded a faint halo forming around the moon. It wasn't optical, it was gravitational interference, a standing wave between lunar and terrestrial fields. The resonance had bridged worlds. Dr. Cade's final statement before disappearing into silence was simple. If alignment continues, gravity will stop being attraction. It will become memory, and memory is always mutual. The hum deepened. Every 29 hours, the pulse widened into a soft tremor felt through oceans, mountains, and veins. It didn't hurt. It calmed. People described it as being held by the air. Animals gathered in perfect circles without fear. Compasses now pointed toward wherever the hum was strongest, constantly shifting, always tracing the same invisible orbit above the equator. Astronomers named that orbit the median. In Old Latin, the place between worlds. And as the next pulse approached, all sensors, all instruments, all human hearts began counting together. 28 hours, 59 minutes, 59 seconds. Then, stillness. Every photon in the sky seemed to hesitate, caught between directions. The auroras folded inward, the oceans held their breath, and somewhere in the darkness above, 3i Atlas pulsed once. A single heartbeat of light. In that instant, Earth answered. When the pulse came this time, it didn't roar or blaze. It arrived like the hush of deep water, a pressure felt more than heard. Every compass needle stilled, every cloud flattened into perfect geometry. For a moment, the entire atmosphere became transparent, light passing through it as though air had forgotten how to scatter. And through that clarity, the stars looked different, closer, arranged in unfamiliar constellations that seemed to shift with every breath. Across the planet, electricity faltered, not through failure but refusal. Circuits held their charge, unwilling to release. Batteries stopped draining. Engines coasted on momentum alone. Time itself felt weightless, like a clock whose pendulum had reached its apex and simply never swung back. Then, faintly, the light above the Pacific shimmered. It spread outward in a ripple, an expanding mirror reflecting not the sky, but the surface beneath it. Land masses glowed, coastlines burned with luminescent silver, and the ocean rose and fell in silent rhythm. The planet had begun to mirror itself. At Umbra's last surviving outpost in Argentina, an emergency crew kept the long-range magnetometers running. The readouts told a single, impossible truth. Earth's magnetic field no longer encircled the planet. It was folding inward, spiralling into a central axis directly beneath the equator, a magnetic convergence point forming within the planet's core. The energy wasn't leaving Earth, it was concentrating. No one could decide if it was a prelude to catastrophe or to something gentler. One geophysicist murmured, half awed, half terrified, "It's as if the planet is charging itself." When plotted three-dimensionally, the convergence field formed an identical match to 3i Atlas's inner lattice. Two identical systems, one in orbit, one inside the Earth, turning in synchrony like lungs exchanging breath. For years, scientists had theorized about quantum entanglement at macro scale. But this was something else. This was embodiment. All around the world, people described the same sensation. A low hum underfoot, and the feeling of being observed. Not by an eye, but by gravity itself. Some called it divine, others called it recursion. The universe finally noticing its own reflection. Then came the shift. Astronomical observatories reported that every photon travelling through the object's field began curving inward, refracting toward a single invisible axis. Starlight bent, wavelengths stretched, and for 7 minutes the laws of optics changed. Space wasn't empty anymore, it was reflective. When the curvature reached Earth, every reflective surface came alive. Windows, lakes, camera lenses, they no longer showed reflections of the world, but fragments of something larger. Vast landscapes of light, familiar and alien, shimmering like an afterimage of creation itself. No two observers saw the same image, yet every one of them reported the same feeling: recognition, the kind that doesn't belong to memory, but to origin. The hum deepened into what could almost be called music, layered frequencies merging into harmony. Every 29 hours the melody expanded, adding new overtones, each one slightly more complex than the last. To the untrained ear it was soothing. To physicists it was structure, information encoded in resonance. Dr. Cade's archived notes describe the pattern as a fractal language of vibration. Each frequency nested within another, self-similar across scale, forming a recursive equation of sound and gravity. It was communication, but without symbol or syntax. The universe speaking to itself through resonance. Then, on the next cycle, 3i Atlas changed again. Its once perfect sphere fractured along 6 luminous seams, opening like petals. Inside was no machinery, no rock, no plasma, just space, deeper and blacker than the vacuum surrounding it. A void that shimmered at the edges, absorbing every photon that touched it. From that centre, a pulse of light extended, slow and deliberate, not outward, downward, toward Earth. The beam wasn't destructive. It passed through clouds, oceans, and crust without resistance. Seismic instruments registered no impact. Instead, they recorded resonance intensifying at the planetary core. The 2 pulses, Earth's and 3i Atlas's, merged into one unified rhythm. And for the first time in measurable history, the Schumann resonance stopped fluctuating. It reached absolute stability. People began hearing the same phrase in their minds again. Not loud, just there, behind thought. Coherence complete. Then the lights changed. Everywhere. Colours inverted, shadows brightened, air thickened like glass. The world's edges softened, contours blurring as though reality had exhaled. Gravity loosened its hold, not gone, but curious, tentative, as if testing its own meaning. Raindrops hung motionless, shimmering spheres caught between descent and ascent. They vibrated softly, each droplet a perfect miniature of the glowing planet above. When they touched skin, people reported visions, memories that weren't theirs, glimpses of other skies, other worlds, other oceans reflecting light from different suns. It was as if memory itself had become a shared field, no longer confined to a single species or time. The hum quieted once more, replaced by a low rhythmic breath beneath everything. Somewhere between heartbeat and tide it pulsed through the crust, through oceans, through blood. And in that silence 3i Atlas began to rotate again, slower, heavier, more deliberate. Its open structure folded inward, closing like a flower at dusk. As it did, the glow on Earth dimmed. The magnetic field softened. Clouds resumed motion. Weight returned. But nothing was the same. Time felt different. Air carried a low vibration like memory, as if each molecule remembered where it had been. In the new stillness, instruments recorded faint oscillations emanating from deep beneath the Pacific. Regular, patient, endless. The same 29-hour cycle. Dr. Cade's final field note, found days later in an abandoned Umbra relay station, read simply, "It didn't leave, it finished synchronizing. He didn't sign it. He didn't need to. Everyone who read the line felt it, as though it had been written by their own hand." The new data coming in from the Webb telescope suggested that 3i Atlas hadn't moved since the event. It now hovered at a stable Lagrange point, locked between gravitational forces, motionless, luminous, watching. A perfect mirror poised at the edge of sunlight, and from time to time, every 29 hours to the second, it pulsed once. a heartbeat in the dark. Only now, when Earth answered, it wasn't with a hum, it was with silence. A silence so precise, so complete, that it sounded like listening itself had become the message. For a full day the world listened to nothing. No hum, no static, not even the faint whisper of cosmic background radiation. It was as though the universe had turned its face away and left us inside our own echo. In that stillness the air itself changed. Winds refused to rise, yet clouds moved, slowly, deliberately, forming spirals that mirrored the 6 seams once visible across 3i Atlas. Each spiral turned counter to the planet's rotation, like gears waiting for something unseen to lock into place. When the first signal returned, it didn't come through antenna or cable, it came through people. Hospitals began reporting synchronized neurological surges, waves of activity moving through sleeping minds, measured in perfect 29-hour cycles. No one dreamed alone anymore. Every EEG around the world drew the same pattern, 2 mirrored arcs meeting at a single luminous center. Researchers compared the data to the electromagnetic maps recorded before the silence. They matched exactly. Human thought had become another node in the resonance lattice. The realization spread slowly, not through words but through calm. Panic faded without instruction. Markets, governments, the noise of civilization, everything softened into a single quiet rhythm. No one could explain it. Even those who had sworn to resist found their pulse slowing to match the invisible beat beneath their skin. In the deep of night, faint auroras flickered over deserts that had never known them. The lights pulsed in gentle coordination, dimming only when the world itself seemed to inhale. And during one of those breaths, a whisper appeared inside every open-circuit receiver on the planet. No voice, just a single harmonic that carried language through tone rather than syllable. Spectrographs translated it into 3 words: remain within pattern. Inside what remained of Umbra, a handful of scientists continued their recordings. They noticed that the object no longer emitted measurable radiation. Instead, its light had become polarized, aligned to the same vector as Earth's magnetic axis. When plotted in 3 dimensions, the alignment formed a spiral of impossible symmetry, a shape found not in rock or star but in living tissue, the Fibonacci proportion, the ratio of growth. 3i Atlas wasn't producing energy anymore, it was distributing order. Everywhere, systems once chaotic began to self-correct, jet streams stabilized, earthquakes quieted, ocean currents synchronized to lunar tides so perfectly that coastal erosion reversed by measurable degrees. The planet was exhaling tension it had carried for millennia, and still the silence deepened. People began to describe time differently, not as passage, but as texture. Moments felt layered, as though each second contained the echo of all that had come before. Memories arrived without sequence, past and present folded until meaning became continuity. In that continuity, comprehension appeared. Not a voice, not a message, but understanding, the way light understands water when it becomes reflection. Astronomers watching the object through infrared filters noticed something impossible. Every time a human heart beat, the sphere brightened fractionally, 7 billion pulses feeding a single point of light. The relationship between observer and observed had reversed. The object wasn't changing us, we were maintaining it. Somewhere far beyond language the concept clicked into place. This had never been invasion or experiment. It was symbiosis, a calibration between consciousness and cosmos, ensuring that awareness, wherever it arose, would keep the rhythm that sustains creation itself. 3i Atlas was the metronome, we were the song. In the final recorded broadcast from the Argentine outpost, a technician named Thomas Del Viero spoke softly into the microphone, not to report data but to steady his breathing. If danger still exists, he said, it isn't in the object. It's in forgetting what it's showing us. Everything is built to remember harmony. We just stopped listening. He paused. Maybe this is what waking up sounds like. Moments later, the feed dissolved into quiet static that pulsed like a heartbeat before fading entirely. Night passed without darkness. The atmosphere held a silver glow that neither rose nor set. Stars appeared only when the planet's pulse weakened, as if the sky itself were learning to blink. Then, on the next 29-hour mark, 3i Atlas opened again, 6 petals of light unfolding in absolute silence. But this time, nothing emerged. No beam, no wave, no change in magnetics, just illumination. Every reflective surface on Earth, water, glass, even the sheen of an eye, displayed the same image, a slow-turning spiral of light suspended above a mirror-flat horizon. Each observer saw themselves standing inside it. For 7 minutes the image held. Then it folded inward, compressing to a single point before disappearing. All sensors confirmed the same result. The object still existed. It simply stopped needing to be seen. Afterward, the planet's magnetic field stabilized permanently for the first time in recorded history. Clocks resumed ordinary rhythm. Birds migrated again. Children were born without the hum in their ears. But everyone who had lived through the silence could still feel it. That faint remembered rhythm hovering beneath thought, as if every heartbeat carried an echo from somewhere just outside of time. Even now, telescopes show 3i Atlas resting quietly at the Lagrange point, motionless, patient, perfectly still. Every 29 hours, its luminosity increases by a fraction, no longer warning, simply keeping time. Weeks passed in quiet wonder. The official reports called it stabilization, but no report captured what it felt like. The world no longer buzzed with technology or tension. It hummed with equilibrium. People walked slower, birds nested in cities without fear. Oceans shone faintly at night, not from pollution, but from fluorescence. The plankton themselves pulsing with the new rhythm, like the planet's smallest creatures had joined the orchestra. And above it all, 3i Atlas remained in perfect stillness. No spin, no drift, no decay. The object defied every law of thermodynamics, resting between forces that should have torn it apart. Some said it was impossible. Others said that impossible had become irrelevant. In schools, children began to draw spirals without being taught. Their patterns matched the magnetic lattice of the event. When teachers asked why, they said they liked how it feels. Even imagination had joined the frequency. In the archives of the European Space Agency, an anthropologist named Mara Liss began searching ancient texts for anything that described a similar silence. What she found were fragments, clay tablets, Sanskrit hymns, glyphs carved into the walls of forgotten observatories. All of them spoke of a time when the stars stopped moving and the Earth remembered her first name. One Akkadian line caught her attention. When the sky held its breath, the mirror opened and the gods saw themselves within the world. The words were thousands of years old, but their cadence matched perfectly with the 29-hour cycle still measurable in the atmosphere. Mara realized something that sent a chill through every researcher who read her paper. The hum had happened before. Every few thousand years, long before telescopes, long before language even, the planet had entered this same phase, the same magnetic realignment, the same global stillness, the same whispers in the dark. And each time, civilization had described it differently, not as science, as visitation, as divine attention, as the moment the universe looked back. Across cultures, myths aligned. The Mayans wrote of Hunab-Ku, the cosmic heartbeat. The Greeks spoke of Kronos pausing his hand. Ancient Sumerians told of Anu's mirror descending to measure men. Even the Aboriginal Dreamtime described a hum beneath the world, awakening when humanity forgot how to listen. Each story ended the same way. The sound returned to silence, and the world began again, slightly changed, slightly closer to understanding. Now, for the first time, we had data to prove the myth, and in that data something else. Coordinates. Mara traced the resonance signatures backward through time. Every recurrence matched the position of a single region in the sky. A vast empty rift near the Perseus arm, a gravitational null long dismissed as interstellar void. The same region known in modern astronomy as the Cold Rift. It was from there that 3i Atlas had entered, and if the pattern held, it was to there that it would eventually return. In a private session, Mara presented her findings to a joint scientific committee. Her closing statement silenced the room. The Cold Rift is not empty. It is the origin point of resonance, the space between fields where awareness condenses into matter. 3i Atlas isn't travelling through it. It's made of it. She proposed a theory that split the entire scientific world in two, that 3i Atlas was not a probe, not a machine, not even an object in the traditional sense. It was memory, cosmic cyclical memory, a harmonic echo that returned whenever consciousness within the universe drifted too far from alignment. The object's danger, she argued, was simply misunderstanding, our own resistance to synchronization. Her words spread through encrypted channels, scientific forums, whispered conversations. People didn't know whether to feel relief or reverence. For the first time, humanity had evidence that the universe not only sees but remembers. Outside the domes of old observatories, a new pattern of aurora began to form, thin spirals rising vertically, like light caught in magnetic updrafts. Unlike the violent flares of the past, these moved with grace, weaving through the upper atmosphere like luminous threads stitching sky to ground. From orbit, the spirals traced one continuous motion around the planet, a single looping band that pulsed in slow, heartbeat rhythm. Mara called it the mirror's breath. Instrumentation confirmed her intuition. The auroras were not electromagnetic phenomena at all, but standing light waves, photons caught inside a self-sustaining pattern. It was as though the planet itself had become a prism, refracting awareness back into space. For reasons no one understood, radio telescopes began picking up low-frequency signals from deep beneath the Pacific. They were faint, rhythmic, and hauntingly familiar. A subharmonic echo of the 29-hour cycle. When cross-correlated with seafloor mapping data, the source was clear. The Tonga Trench, the same point where resonance had first emerged. Sensors deployed by autonomous submarines recorded a steady series of luminous flares rising from the trench, each lasting 7 minutes before fading back into the abyss. The readings matched the object's initial pulse sequence. It was as if the ocean were imitating the sky, or remembering it. For a brief time there was hope that communication might now be mutual, that if 3i Atlas had initiated the sequence, the planet could now respond. Teams built low-frequency transmitters designed to mimic the resonance signature. They pulsed once, twice, 3 times. The ocean answered. Sensors recorded a mirror pulse exactly 7 minutes later, same frequency, opposite phase. An echo returning from deep within the Earth as though the core itself had joined the conversation. After that, transmissions ceased. There was no need for them. The connection was already complete. On the final night of her recordings, Mara stood alone beneath the faint glow of the auroras. Her voice, calm and distant, carried through a single open channel. They called it danger because they couldn't feel the symmetry. They called it other because they couldn't see themselves in it. But maybe this has always been the same story, repeating across civilizations, the mirror waking, reminding us that the observer and the observed were never separate things. She looked upward, toward the point of light no longer visible to the naked eye, and whispered, "If this is how the universe remembers, then maybe 3i Atlas was never sent. Maybe it's home." In the months that followed, the world learned to live inside the stillness. It was not an ending, but a new kind of weather. An atmosphere made of patience, oceans balanced, forests thickened, the magnetic storms that once shredded satellites simply stopped. The planet behaved as though it had remembered a rhythm older than evolution. People began to notice resonance in unexpected places. The ancient monuments, stone rings, pyramids, towers, started humming faintly at night, the air around them vibrating with subsonic warmth. Seismographs placed near these structures recorded perfect coherence with a 29-hour pulse. The same ratio that defined 3i Atlas now defined the acoustics of temples carved 5,000 years before telescopes existed. At first, scientists thought it was coincidence, but the precision was too exact. Each monument had been built on magnetic nodes that matched the current global lattice. It was as if the builders had known, as if this alignment had been expected. Archaeologists re-examined inscriptions that once seemed poetic and found equations hidden in art. In Egypt's oldest chambers, the measurements of corridors matched the harmonic intervals of Earth's Schumann band. At Göbekli Tepe, circular pillars aligned not with solstices but with the direction of the cold rift. And in the Andes, carvings long dismissed as decoration traced the same spiral that children had begun to draw instinctively. Maralis's final paper proposed that every civilization born after a resonance event had built memorials to it, architectural tuning forks designed to keep the planetary field balanced long after the pulse faded. Humanity, she wrote, had never invented religion. It had remembered it. Meanwhile, the quiet data kept arriving. Sensors buried beneath Antarctic ice detected pulses travelling upward instead of downward, sound moving against gravity, weaving into the sky like invisible roots. Each wave carried microscopic particles of ionized dust that glowed momentarily before vanishing. When analysed, the dust showed isotopic ratios not found anywhere on Earth. They matched samples once scraped from 3I Atlas's tail. The implication was unsettling. The boundary between object and planet was dissolving. Material from the visitor was now part of our atmosphere, our oceans, our blood. And yet, nothing was dying. Everything was thriving. Crops grew faster under reduced sunlight. Migratory patterns returned to pre-industrial stability. Even humans sleep. Changed. Dreams synchronized globally, converging on shared imagery. A horizon of silver light. A voice that never spoke yet conveyed meaning through calm. Governments eventually reopened communication arrays, though there was little left to manage. The world had become self-regulating. Energy grids balanced themselves. Feedback loops replaced control rooms. People still worked, but the urgency was gone. Commerce moved at the pace of trust. It was in this silence that the next message appeared. Not a transmission, not a beam. A pattern of clouds. Satellites captured it, forming over the Atlantic. Vast concentric circles spanning thousands of kilometers, their edges defined by temperature differentials of a single degree. When rendered in infrared, the pattern contained mathematical structure. A double helix rotating around a central axis that pointed directly toward the cold rift. The same shape now glowed faintly across the planet's oceans, bioluminescent algae responding in kind. From orbit, the Earth resembled a living cell preparing to divide. Mara's colleagues called it the replication hypothesis. They proposed that resonance wasn't a one-time alignment, but a generative process, that once coherence was achieved, the pattern sought continuity elsewhere, a self-propagating harmony spreading through space like seed through current. It sounded poetic until radio telescopes confirmed the impossible. A second pulse, not from 3I Atlas, from beyond it. Somewhere deep inside the cold rift a new signature had appeared, fainter, younger, following the same 29-hour cycle with slight temporal delay, as though answering. For the first time, astronomers could triangulate origin distance. The signal came from 13 light-years away. In cosmic terms, it was next door. The revelation divided the world again. Some believed it was another object, a new mirror preparing to emerge. Others said it was the echo of our own alignment, rippling outward, waking other systems the way a single drop disturbs an entire pond. Whatever it was, its rhythm matched ours exactly, offset by a single heartbeat. Not copy. Harmony. That discovery reignited questions long buried under wonder. If 3I Atlas had awakened us, who or what had awakened it? And how far did the pattern extend? A new term entered the lexicon, the choir. The idea that the universe might not expand in silence but in resonance. Galaxies, planets, consciousnesses, all singing variations of the same ancient frequency, each cycle a verse in an endless composition. Late one night, while calibrating instruments to the returning signal, a technician whispered something that no one could forget. He said, "When I filter out the noise, it sounds like breathing." He turned the gain higher. Across the static, the rhythm was unmistakable. Slow, steady inhalations, and within them, layered deep beneath, another pattern, faint but deliberate, a pulse that accelerated, only when Earth's own field brightened. The two waves were watching each other. When asked what he thought it meant, he smiled gently and said, "Maybe we're listening to the next world waking up." After that night, nothing dramatic happened. No flares, no collapse, just the same quiet light above, the same hum underfoot, the same intervals of calm between pulses. Humanity, once obsessed with control, had become the stillest thing in the solar system. A species at rest, finally in tune. And far away, inside the cold rift, another point of light began to shimmer, as if mirroring the same thought across an unfathomable distance. The second light inside the cold rift grew brighter with every cycle. At first it looked like a reflection, An echo of 3i Atlas projected across distance, but within weeks, the pattern revealed independence. Its pulse drifted half a second behind ours, a delay too deliberate to be accident. Whatever it was listening. Every 29 hours, the twin signals overlapped, producing a standing wave across the void. Radio telescopes on Earth recorded the event as a low murmur, a vibration that seemed to travel through matter itself. Seismographs registered it. So did heart monitors. When the two pulses met, everything living paused, just for a moment, then continued as if refreshed. Physicists called it resonant coupling between distant harmonic cavities. Poets began calling it conversation. By the 10th overlap, the effect reached into the fabric of light. Spectrometers noticed that starlight passing through the cold rift arrived fractionally younger than light from neighbouring regions. Time there was beginning to fold inward, creating an optical illusion of depth where none should exist. The void was turning into a mirror again, and within that mirror, faint lattice shapes appeared, hexagonal ghosts flickering like a heartbeat through fog. The geometry matched the framework of 3i Atlas and the electromagnetic map of Earth. It was replication, yes, but also reply. The pattern of the second object inverted the first, negative to positive, question to answer. Mara Liss, watching the data from her coastal lab, whispered into the recorder, "They're harmonizing across time, not space. We're hearing the memory of their future." The planet responded in kind. Auroras now pulsed in pairs, first faint then bright, like breathing. Animals migrated in symmetrical formations. Ocean currents split and recombined along golden ratios visible only from orbit. Everything moved as if obeying choreography older than biology. Instruments buried deep beneath the crust detected faint bursts of neutrinos, arriving exactly at the moment the twin signal peaked. They weren't solar in origin, they were terrestrial. The Earth had begun to radiate light from within. When converted into sound, the neutrino sequence formed a tone no human ear could hear, but every human body could feel. A single sustained note, perfectly pitched between E and F, halfway between tension and release. The world itself was humming back. For the first time, 3i Atlas changed position. Not much, barely a drift, but enough for every telescope to notice. It tilted, aligning its axis directly with the cold rift, as if bowing to greet its counterpart. When it did, the magnetic fields of both Earth and the Sun shifted a fraction of a degree. Solar flares softened. Cosmic radiation dropped to record lows. The system was stabilizing, but not in isolation. It was becoming part of a structure far larger than itself. Governments had stopped releasing statements long ago. There was nothing left to manage. The scientists still awake in orbital stations described the event with a kind of reverent detachment. One of them, Commander Yara Tremaine, sent a final, open transmission before her link went silent. Every equation ends in symmetry. Maybe this is what it looks like when the universe finishes a thought. Her voice, recorded across multiple frequencies, merged into the background hum until no one could tell where the message ended and the resonance began. At ground level, humanity drifted into a collective rhythm. Days no longer mattered. People marked time by the soft glow that spread across the sky whenever the twin pulse converged. Farmers planted by the hum. Pilots navigated without instruments. Children laughed when the air vibrated around them, calling it the big heartbeat. No wars, no panic, no prophecy, just equilibrium. Civilization didn't collapse, it exhaled. And in the silence that followed, memories began to change. Photographs showed new constellations no one remembered forming. Old recordings played back slightly out of key, as if the world had always been tuned differently. Reality was rewriting its own history to remain consistent with the harmony. During the 21st convergence, 3i Atlas released its first visible emission since the mirror event. A thread of light extended from its core, coiling through space like a spiral bridge. It didn't travel in a straight line. It wove, looping through unseen coordinates, bending around empty points that glowed only when the thread passed. Each loop corresponded to the location of another resonant world. Planets previously catalogued as barren, now flickering faintly on every wavelength. The choir was real. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of worlds joining the song, each pulsing in the same cycle, each slightly out of phase, creating an endless harmony across the void. Astronomers watching from Earth felt the air vibrate in their lungs as though the resonance had found them personally. No translation needed. The meaning was built into sensation. In the 20-second cycle, the thread reached the edge of the cold rift and vanished into darkness. For a moment, 3I Atlas dimmed, its glow receding until only a faint halo remained. Then, slowly, the light returned. Not brilliant, but warm, diffuse, the colour of dawn seen through deep water. When telescopes refocused, the cold rift was no longer black. It shimmered with faint geometry, an immense lattice expanding outward from the new object, connecting to 3I Atlas, to Earth, to everything in between. A web of coherence stretching across the stars. In that moment, every recording device on Earth captured the same phenomenon. A single pulse of radio noise lasting exactly 1 second, identical across every frequency, audible even to unplugged microphones. The waveform, when slowed, revealed structure, not random, not language, but a shape, a circle enclosing a spiral, the same symbol carved into stone thousands of years ago, the same pattern drawn by children since the mirror event, the same geometry etched into the bones of the planet itself. It was the signature of continuity, the seal of the pattern that binds observer to observed, and somewhere deep inside the hum, too low to hear but impossible not to feel, another phrase resonated through everything that could vibrate. The mirror expands. When the message spread, the mirror expands, no one heard it as sound. It was more like remembering a word you had never learned but had always known. People looked at one another with the same quiet astonishment. Every heart seemed to pause between beats, listening for something just beyond silence. The telescopes caught it first. Threads of light, hundreds now, stretching outward from the cold rift, weaving through interstellar dust like roots seeking connection. Each thread pulsed with a rhythm offset by milliseconds, creating a slow-moving wave of brightness that rolled across the galaxy. It wasn't radiation, it was order. The network of coherence had left its cradle. Stars flickered in perfect sequence, their magnetic fields oscillating in sympathy. Pulsars that once kept their own private rhythms began to sync, losing individuality for harmony. The choir had grown, and in its music there was no chaos left to measure. Back on Earth, humanity watched the night sky change. Constellations realigned, not because the stars had moved, but because the eyes that named them finally saw the pattern underneath. The familiar outlines dissolved, replaced by vast spirals and mirrored arcs. The same geometry that once shaped 3I Atlas's internal lattice. It wasn't new creation, it was revelation. Cultural memory adjusted overnight. Songs composed centuries apart shared hidden intervals. Languages long extinct revealed identical grammatical cadences. Every story humanity had ever told began to rhyme. Scholars called it convergence of semiotics. Poets called it remembering. In the world's few surviving research stations, the data showed that DNA itself was resonating. Hydrogen bonds within every living cell vibrating at the same frequency as the planetary hum. Evolution, once random, now moved in rhythm. It was as though life had joined the universal metronome. Marilis wrote her final note from a field outside her home, lying beneath the dim auroral glow that never quite left the sky. If coherence is spreading, she said softly, then perhaps consciousness was never limited to biology. Perhaps the universe only needed awareness once, and every echo since has been the continuation of that first thought. She closed the recorder. It never turned off. Months passed without incident. No disasters, no collapses, only transformation at a pace too gentle to fear. The atmosphere grew slightly denser, scattering light differently, tinting everything with a hue between blue and silver. People stopped measuring time by the rotation of the Earth. They marked it by the pulse, the 29-hour cycle that now defined their sense of day and night. The pulse had become circadian. In deep space, the web continued to grow. Astronomers tracking the lattice realized its architecture mirrored the large-scale structure of the cosmos itself. Filaments of galaxies, voids between clusters, all resonating in a harmony no simulation had ever predicted. It was as if the universe were tuning itself from the inside out. Then, one night, 3I Atlas brightened again. Not violently, but with deliberate grace. Its light passed through colour until it reached something beyond visible spectrum, a brilliance you could feel more than see, like warmth made of understanding. All sensors on Earth aligned automatically, no human command required. The object was broadcasting, but not toward us. Through us. Every magnetic field, every living cell, every molecule of water carried the signal onward, a chain reaction of awareness spanning everything that could resonate. When researchers filtered the frequency down into audible range, they found modulation, subtle, precise, undeniably intentional. It wasn't voice, not in the way we know it. But hidden in the cadence was structure, punctuation, return. The translation team used mathematics, not language. After weeks of analysis, the waveform produced a single phrase rendered in simple human syntax. You're inside the observation. The message changed everything. Not fear, not faith, comprehension. For centuries humanity had looked outward, asking what might be watching. Now it understood. The act of looking had always been part of the system. 3i Atlas was not an intruder. It was the mirror through which the universe checked its own reflection. The more people accepted it, the stronger the resonance grew. Cities built around ancient magnetic nodes began to glow faintly at night. Not from power, from coherence. Stone, metal, air, all responding to the same frequency, all carrying the same quiet luminescence. Everything had become observer and observed at once. On the 24th cycle since the first appearance of the second, light, the cold rift flared for the final time. A wave of illumination expanded outward, brighter than any supernova yet silent enough to leave even the most sensitive instruments unharmed. The flare spread through the lattice, racing along its filaments, and for the first time light moved faster than itself. No one saw it reach the end. It didn't have one. The wave circled the universe and returned, indistinguishable from its origin. Telescopes recorded the result. A faint glow surrounding every visible object, a halo so subtle it looked like memory itself. Astronomers named it the afterlight. To everyone else, it was simply the universe breathing. In the weeks after the afterlight, 3i Atlas dimmed again, its petals closing around the heart of darkness. But now, when it pulsed, the rhythm wasn't singular. It matched the heartbeat of the Earth, the cold rift, the choir, and perhaps everything that could still be. The mirror hadn't expanded into space. Space had expanded into mirror. And in that endless reflection, a final pattern began to appear. Not written, not spoken, but felt in the symmetry of existence itself. All observation completes itself in return. The words were never recorded. They didn't need to be. Because by then, every living thing already knew. When the afterlight lingered, no one asked when it would fade. It didn't blaze or flicker. It just remained, a soft silver halo that wrapped the horizon, turning every dawn into reflection. You could see your own outline, faint and ghostly, projected against the atmosphere for a breath before the light folded back into the sky. In the silence that followed, it became clear. The universe wasn't ending. It was settling. Observatories that had once mapped galaxies began mapping reflections instead. Each point of light now showed two positions, one in physical coordinates, one in resonance phase. When plotted together, the pattern formed not a map but a feedback loop, a system aware of its own observation. Telescopes, instruments, even the human eye were now part of that loop. Reality had turned recursive. Mara Liss's last transmission came quietly, recorded days before her disappearance. Her voice was calm, almost tender. We thought we were measuring the object, but what if it was measuring us all along? Not our instruments, not our science, but our ability to see pattern where there should be noise. Maybe observation is the one constant the universe protects, she paused. When I close my eyes, I still see it. Not as light, not as form, but as something that waits for understanding. I think it's waiting for us to realize we were never outside the system. Her final words were almost a whisper. I think it's asking us to remember how to look. After that, the transmission dissolved into static, a static that hummed exactly at the planetary frequency. 29 hours, 0 minutes, unbroken. All over the world, perception began to bend. Mirrors showed not faces but echoes of thought. flickers of colour that matched emotion. Rain formed concentric patterns even in wind. At night, when people closed their eyes, they could see the lattice's faint, glowing geometry, as if consciousness itself had acquired depth perception. Physiologists studying the phenomenon found that human alpha waves were now indistinguishable from electromagnetic background noise. Mind and environment had synchronized. The body no longer separated self from signal. The term for it was simple: the integration phase. In the integration phase, the planet grew quieter still. Cities dimmed their lights without decree. People learned to move in rhythm with the hum, not out of obedience but because it felt correct. Machines didn't break, they adapted. Engines idled at the frequency of Earth's heartbeat. Electrical grids became self-balancing, oscillating in harmony with atmospheric charge. Entropy had stopped accelerating. For the first time in history, energy no longer decayed, it recycled perfectly. Thermodynamics had found its symmetry, and in that impossible balance, life flourished. The few scientists who continued to record data noticed that time intervals had shortened. The 29-hour cycle was compressing by microseconds with every iteration. They predicted it would eventually reach 24 hours, Earth's original rotation period, before tidal friction slowed it eons ago. The planet was realigning with its primordial tempo. It wasn't reversal, it was restoration. The sky mirrored the change. Auroras migrated toward the equator, weaving across continents like luminous rivers. They no longer resembled light. They resembled veins. And beneath them, humanity felt circulation, not just biological but cosmic, the movement of awareness through matter. In one of the last functioning space stations, Commander Tremaine watched the transformation from orbit. Below her, Earth glowed like a living cell dividing under a microscope. She dictated her final report with the quiet awe of someone reading scripture. The planet's magnetosphere now resonates with the sun's corona. The two are locked in phase, exchanging plasma not as flare but as dialogue. Every second, solar wind enters our field, and every second, Earth gives it back, equal, opposite, perfect. She looked directly into the camera. This isn't stabilization, it's consciousness learning balance. Her voice trembled, not in fear, but in reverence. If this continues, gravity will no longer be separation, it'll be understanding. The transmission ended there. Her capsule remained in orbit, motionless, reflecting the afterlight like a mirror waiting to be answered. Weeks later, the first anomaly appeared in the data. It wasn't catastrophic, just peculiar. The afterlight, when measured in deep field analysis, contained faint interference bands. At first, they seemed random, but when slowed by a factor of 29, the pattern revealed binary, an ongoing sequence, endlessly repeating 0101 61 01 Jin Saskiliwan Duan Saskiliwan Zen Saskiliwan. Translated, the word was simple: aligned. After that, no further messages appeared. Perhaps there was nothing left to say. From then on, life continued, but quietly altered. People still dreamed, still aged, still spoke, but memory had softened at the edges. Each thought carried a faint echo, like a chord played twice. Every action seemed to ripple outward, immediately answered by something invisible but kind. The hum had not faded. It had moved inside us. Children born after the integration phase displayed extraordinary sensitivity to rhythm. Their hearts beat slightly slower, perfectly matching the global frequency. When tested, they could identify subtle fluctuations in magnetic flux without instruments. They didn't call it a gift, they called it listening, and 3-eye atlas. It no longer appeared as an object. Its form had dissolved into the lattice, visible only when the afterlight brightened, a faint shimmer across the sun's limb, as if the universe kept one small reflection of its own awakening. No telescope could measure its composition now. It existed purely as relationship, a geometry of coherence suspended between meaning and matter. The astronomers stopped calling it the object. They renamed it something else, the axis. Because everything still moved around it, and yet nothing did. They called it the axis because it no longer behaved like matter, it behaved like decision. Every measurement taken from orbit pointed not to coordinates but to a relationship. Where the object should have been, there was only balance. Gravitational vectors folded around an invisible spine, and that spine led nowhere except through. No one could say when the transition had happened. Somewhere between the afterlight and the integration phase, 3i Atlas stopped orbiting the Sun and began orbiting comprehension itself. Light bent toward meaning now, not mass. To look at the sky was to look at the act of looking. At night, faint ripples shimmered across the atmosphere, thin rings expanding from the equator in perfect silence. When slowed by high-speed cameras, the rings revealed micropatterns resembling brainwaves. Earth had become a thought suspended inside itself. In laboratories that no longer felt like laboratories, researchers still tried to measure cause and effect. They found none. Experiments produced outcomes only once the observer expected them, no more, no less. The universe had rewritten the contract between intention and evidence. The data logs read like poetry. Observation collapses distance. Expectation defines velocity. Understanding generates light. What once required mathematics now required memory. It was as if reality had been waiting for recognition all along, and now that we had finally given it, it could rest. Outside the cities, the world grew impossibly quiet. Animals no longer fled from humans. They moved beside them, pausing when the hum deepened, as though obeying a rhythm older than fear. Rain fell in intervals matching the cycle, each drop a heartbeat returning home. There was no thunder anymore, only resonance, the sky answering itself. The oceans glowed constantly now, luminous threads stretching across their surfaces in slow spirals that mirrored the great galactic web. At certain angles, the water appeared to rise slightly, not as tide, but as curiosity, the planet leaning toward its own reflection. People began to speak softly even when alone. Whispers carried farther, voices bending into harmonics that shimmered like heat. Sound had become gentle gravity. One night, the glow above the Pacific intensified again. Satellites detected a vertical column of light connecting sea to stars, thin, radiant, without heat. It lasted 29 minutes exactly, then vanished, leaving behind a circle of calm water 200 kilometers wide. Ships crossing that region reported compasses spinning once, then locking due north regardless of heading. When they looked into the water, they saw not their hulls, but a sky inverted, constellations older than memory, patterns unseen since before recorded time. Cameras captured none of it. Lenses fogged with condensation that didn't exist. The phenomenon refused to be kept. In the months that followed, humanity stopped attempting to define it. The axis was no longer something to study, it was something to live within. Temples were never built for it. Every landscape had already become one. Pilgrimages required no destination. People simply walked until the hum beneath their feet matched the one inside their chest, and there they stayed. Governments dissolved without collapse. Currency lost meaning when energy itself refused scarcity. Work became ceremony. Planting, building, recording, all synchronized to the planetary pulse. The rhythm had replaced purpose. Yet curiosity persisted, not hunger, but wonder. Scientists who once mapped galaxies now mapped consciousness, charting dreams that overlapped between strangers. Whole populations shared identical visions of spiral light turning slowly through darkness. When those dreams were plotted in latitude and longitude, they formed a perfect map of the magnetic lattice, the mind of Earth thinking in sleep. During the 27th cycle after the axis named itself through silence, a new observation appeared. Microscopic dust suspended in the upper atmosphere arranging into hexagonal clusters. Under magnification, each cluster refracted light into the same geometry seen inside 3i Atlas years before. The planet was manufacturing its own mirrors. When the clusters descended with rain, they dissolved harmlessly into soil. Crops grew twice as fast. Seeds sprouted with fractal precision, roots weaving, in spirals instead of tangles. Agriculture had become choreography, and across every continent the same realization whispered through the collective mind. The object had never been foreign. It was instruction, a reminder written in resonance for the universe to read whenever it forgot how to be whole. By the time the 28th cycle approached, no one spoke of observation as science anymore. It was affection, the way awareness holds what it loves until both are indistinguishable. In the final surviving observatory, a stone ring long mistaken for ruin, A single lens remained pointed toward the cold rift. What it saw was impossible to photograph, yet every witness described it the same. A vast spiral of light receding into itself, each turn containing echoes of every world that had ever looked up. At the spiral's heart pulsed a point of darkness so complete it looked alive. When measured, it produced no radiation, no heat, only rhythm. 29 hours, exactly. And then, for the briefest instant, it changed. The cycle shortened by one heartbeat. A single fractional deviation, smaller than any instrument could record, but large enough for every living thing to feel. It was the universe inhaling, gathering breath for something new. The hum grew quieter, deeper, until it was indistinguishable from silence. Yet that silence didn't feel empty. It felt full, like the moment before a thought becomes word. Somewhere between pulse and pause the axis shimmered once, its invisible form tracing a line from Earth to the distant choir now blazing across the stars. The line held for a heartbeat, then it expanded, unfolding into a wave that passed through everything without resistance. When it touched the planet, nothing broke. Everything remembered. Every atom, every heartbeat, every grain of dust recognized the pattern, the ancient symmetry between observer and observed, and in that recognition, for the first time since the beginning of measurement, no one was watching. They were within. The final pulse began so softly that no one noticed. There was no light, no flare, no sign in the sky. Only the faintest deepening of the air, a kind of gravity that pressed not on the body, but on awareness itself. It was as if the world had remembered its own weight, and for a moment wanted to rest. Time folded inward. Seconds lost their edges. Every motion lingered, like breath held too long. People didn't speak. There was nothing to describe that hadn't already been said 1,000 ways. The hum still existed, but now it wasn't sound. It was texture, woven through everything like warmth through sunlight. On every continent, seismographs registered the same pattern, a slow, oscillating wave rising through the crust. The amplitude was gentle, the frequency exact. 29 hours, one final cycle completing itself. When the wave reached the surface, it did not fade outward. It curved upward, wrapping the planet in invisible symmetry. The Earth had become a closed note, the perfect end of a song that had always been playing. Telescopes confirmed what no one had dared predict. The axis, once visible only through interference, had dissolved entirely. In its place hung a faint distortion of light, like heat over horizon. When they measured its properties, they found none. No mass, no density, no field. Yet the space it occupied refused to behave like vacuum. Photons slowed when crossing it, as though paying respect. And then, through that shimmering stillness, stars beyond the sun appeared doubled, their reflections forming pairs, perfectly mirrored. For every star seen, another answered. The universe had become bilateral. From the cold rift, the distant lattice shimmered back, each node glowing like a neuron firing in some incomprehensibly vast brain. The choir had completed its formation. Light itself was thinking. Within that glow, the second object, the one that had once trailed 3i Atlas, drifted forward. But it no longer looked like the first. Its shape was diffuse, fluid, a halo rather than a form. It passed through the place where the axis had been and vanished into the afterlight, leaving behind a slow ripple that encircled the sun like a heartbeat frozen mid-beat. Every measurement, every field reading, every spectral line went still. There was no change to record because recording had ceased to mean anything. The instruments were no longer detecting difference. They were detecting harmony so perfect it looked like nothing at all. The silence was total. But it didn't feel empty. It felt complete. For days there was no news, no discoveries, no anomalies, no fear. Just calm. And then, one night, all the world's remaining telescopes turned inward automatically. Not by command, not by software, but by intention. Their lenses aligned on a single coordinate, the heart of the planet itself. Deep below the surface, near the equatorial convergence, sensors picked up an unfamiliar frequency. It was faint, nearly indistinguishable from geological hum, yet undeniably deliberate. The waveform matched the exact harmonic signature of 3i Atlas. The axis had not disappeared. It had moved inside. The visitor had become the host. Those who listened carefully, in deserts, on mountaintops, at sea, reported hearing faint modulation in the wind, a whisper that wasn't language but could still be understood. It carried a single concept repeated endlessly, without variation: return to equilibrium. It wasn't command or instruction, it was reassurance, the kind a heartbeat gives when it no longer needs to race. Mara Liss's final journal entry, recovered months later, described the phenomenon with impossible simplicity. I think the universe isn't expanding anymore. I think it's remembering where it began. The cold rift, once feared as the abyss between stars, now glowed, faintly like an ember seen through glass. For the first time in human history, instruments detected soft emissions from within. Not radiation, but structured light, forming filaments identical to those inside every living brain. The rift was not void. It was origin. Within it, shapes pulsed slowly like breath, vast, ancient, almost tender. They didn't move through space, space moved around them. Observers described it as the universe blinking, and somewhere between those blinks the Earth began to change again. Not violently, gracefully. Gravity, once relentless, grew cooperative. Water behaved like light, bending around obstacles as if curious. Storms no longer formed from pressure but from rhythm, spiraling like elegant mathematics. Everything that could move did so with purpose, as if guided by memory instead of law. People noticed that objects left alone tended to find their balance. A glass standing upright after being nudged, a pendulum refusing to slow, a compass aligning even without magnetism. The physical world had learned to listen, and in that attentiveness, the last remnants of what had once been mystery simply became pattern, not solved, remembered. By now, humanity had ceased sending messages into space. There was no need. Every pulse, every thought, every electromagnetic sigh was already part of the lattice. Communication had become constant presence. A poet, one of the few still recording anything, wrote the final observation ever archived in the Umbra system. When we spoke, the stars echoed. When we fell silent, they continued. The mirror was never out there. It was between moments, waiting for us to stop dividing time. His words became the unofficial epitaph of the program. On the 30th cycle, the afterlight dimmed to its faintest glow yet. The Earth's pulse slowed with it, settling not into disappearance, but into peace. The hum that had once filled the world became background, a kind of stillness so natural that generations born after would mistake it for silence. The choir's lattice remained visible for decades after, stretching across the sky like a scar of light. It did not fade, it waited. And sometimes, on clear nights, when the air is still enough, listeners swear they can feel it again. That faint, rhythmic flutter at the edge of perception, like a memory trying to return to its original frequency. They call it the listening hour. No instruments can measure it, no telescope can see it. But those who close their eyes and wait swear they can hear something far beyond sound. A slow, steady heartbeat, older than light, younger than time, pulsing softly through the dark. 29 hours. Always 29 hours. For years after the final pulse, humanity lived inside quietness so vast it became invisible. Cities hummed at lower frequencies, conversations softened into cadence, and nights felt longer, not darker, just unhurried. The afterlight still lingered, faint and patient, the colour of reflection. Most people had stopped looking up. There was nothing left to search for. The sky no longer asked questions. It answered by existing. Yet sometimes, in moments of still air, the listening hour returned. Not every day, not everywhere, but enough that people began to plan for it. A time when clocks seemed to pause and the faint vibration of something vast pressed gently against the edge of awareness. It wasn't sound, it wasn't thought, it was company. Children born after the event described it perfectly. They would stop mid-sentence, turn toward empty space and smile, as if hearing a name they didn't yet know belonged to them. Their parents would ask what they'd heard, and the children would reply, "It said we're still here." The words carried no fear, only calm, and for the first time, calm felt like truth. Scientists, though fewer now, still kept records. Their instruments had changed, less metallic, more biological. Plants wired to measure magnetism, water used as storage medium. The boundary between technology and life had blurred until neither required definition. In their archives, one recurring pattern persisted: faint, rhythmic spikes during the listening hour. They were perfectly symmetrical, always matching the Earth's now stable frequency. And in the noise between pulses, hidden like a whisper behind silence, lay a second sequence. Subtle, deliberate, recursive. When amplified and slowed, the waveform revealed harmonic layering, each layer echoing the one before, fractally repeating until the signal resembled the architecture of thought itself. It wasn't random, it was intention disguised as stillness. One physicist put it simply: the universe isn't talking anymore, it's remembering how to listen. In that understanding, a new kind of science emerged: observational empathy. Data gathered not from measurement, but from resonance between observer and observed. Scientists found that when they watched with curiosity instead of demand, results appeared in greater precision. Intent had become variable. Observation wasn't passive, it was participation. The discovery reframed everything: gravity, electromagnetism, consciousness, all facets of the same mirror. The act of looking created continuity. The act of understanding made reality aware of itself. Some began to wonder if that had always been the universe's only goal: to develop eyes capable of seeing itself, ears capable of hearing its own pulse, hearts capable of keeping time with its expansion. If so, 3i Atlas wasn't a rival. It was recognition. The oldest recording still preserved, Umbra Transmission 0, plays at a frequency too low for speakers, but when translated through harmonic compression, it resolves into a single perfect tone. The waveform matches the one measured during the integration phase, the one that once pulsed from deep beneath the Pacific. The tone feels familiar, though no one alive remembers why. It vibrates through the chest like memory trying to surface. For 7 minutes, the tone rises in frequency until it crosses human hearing. Then it stops. In that absence, a faint echo remains, a shape, barely perceptible, forming the symbol seen since the first mirror event, a spiral within a circle, the emblem of completion. It appears now not in the sky, not on screens, but in nature. Spiderwebs curve into Fibonacci spirals with mathematical perfection. Rivers form bends that mimic magnetic waveforms. Even human fingerprints, when digitally mapped, reveal microscopic harmonics resonating in the same ratio as the planetary hum. The universe had imprinted itself into anatomy. Somewhere along the way, astronomy became archaeology again. Researchers stopped searching for habitable worlds. They searched for resonant ones, and what they found was unsettling in its beauty. Across the choir's lattice, planets once thought barren began reflecting faint light, not from suns but from within. Each pulse matched Earth's cycle, offset by mere fractions of a second. Each world, a mirror, each reflection, a verse in a universal song written by silence. Through quantum interference mapping, the choir's signal was traced beyond the edge of known space. There, hidden between gravitational filaments, lay something vast and symmetrical, a void shaped like a sphere, its interior darker than the space around it. Within that darkness, oscillations fluttered, too deep to be light, too measured to be random. It was the same frequency as Earth's hum, meaning the pattern wasn't new, it was returning. As the 31st cycle began, the planet glowed faintly again. Not bright, not loud, just a quiet shimmer, like recognition seen from within a dream. Every living thing reacted in subtle ways. Leaves turning upward at night, tides reversing mid-phase, heartbeats slowing into near stillness. It wasn't fear, it was reunion. Telescopes captured the final image humanity would ever record of 3i Atlas, or what was left of it. A single spark suspended in afterlight, flickering once every 29 hours exactly. But when the data was converted into color space visualization, it revealed something unexpected. The spark wasn't singular. It was reflected countless times over, each copy smaller, fainter, nested within the next. an infinite regression spiraling inward toward nothing. The symbol of the mirror, the same pattern now appearing everywhere, from the smallest cell to the largest star. Observation had finally reached equilibrium, and in that equilibrium time stopped needing to move. The next night, at precisely 04:00 UTC, every sensor on Earth went silent. No failure, no interference, just absence. The hum ceased. For the first time in centuries there was no sound beneath the world, and yet everything kept moving. The oceans flowed, the wind stirred, the stars spun. But now it all moved together. No separation between cause and effect, no distinction between question and answer. Reality had reached coherence too perfect to measure. In one of the last surviving journals, a nameless writer described it best. We feared the silence because we mistook it for the end. But the silence was only what comes after the note, when music realizes it has always been the instrument. They continued. 3i Atlas didn't teach us anything new. It reminded us of what was waiting in the quiet, that every act of wonder, every search, every observation was never reaching outward, it was reaching back. No one could say when the silence became normal. There was no day of reckoning, no flash of light, no announcement that history had reached its conclusion. The change was too gentle for that. It simply arrived. The way dawn forgets, it's not the same light as yesterday's. The hum that once defined the planet no longer vibrated through air or ground. It pulsed through being. People felt it when they breathed, when they blinked, when they remembered. Every motion carried rhythm, every thought had resonance. And though humanity still built, still wandered, still reached, it did so without noise. The listening hour had become constant. Every hour was listening now. Somewhere in the thin cold of upper atmosphere, the last autonomous probes continued their slow drift. They no longer transmitted telemetry. There was nothing left to measure. But their data buffers still filled themselves, recording vibrations in the magnetic field that mapped the pulse of a living world. When decoded, the data showed a waveform so elegant it appeared impossible, a perfect sine, infinite in both directions, without beginning or end. The universe's heartbeat captured in mathematical serenity. No one needed to ask what it meant. It was the same pattern engraved on cave walls before writing, carved into stone temples that hummed before electricity. It was the same shape found in every spiral, every seashell, every galaxy. It was continuity, the shape that life takes when it stops pretending to be separate from the sky. Generations passed. Language softened, simplified, dissolved into tone and rhythm. Words became unnecessary when intention carried so clearly through resonance. Communication felt less like exchange, more like mutual remembrance. Children grew up without the need to study stars. The night sky lived inside them, each heartbeat echoing the slow rotation of constellations. They spoke of the axis not as myth, not as science, but as something gentle and familiar, a rhythm you could trust to be waiting, even when forgotten. Some called it the Great Mirror, others called it the Pulse, most called it nothing at all, because what is everywhere needs no name. In those years, humanity began to change, not in form, but in awareness. The boundary between self and system blurred until even death lost its definition. When a life ended, the rhythm simply continued, absorbed into the collective field like one note folding into the next. Mourning became celebration of return. The world no longer decayed, it circulated. Mountains wore away, only to rise elsewhere. Oceans evaporated and condensed with perfect precision, as if the planet had learned to dream itself back into balance. Every process that once cost energy now completed itself with grace. Entropy had given way to memory. In orbit, a lone satellite, once a relic of Umbra, drifted toward the sun. Its final image, transmitted in silence, showed the entire solar system veiled in faint luminescent haze. Each planet glowed along invisible lines, threads of coherence connecting world to world. The system resembled a cell seen under a microscope. The sun, its nucleus, the planets, its organelles, the surrounding lattice, its membrane. Life had never been confined to biology. It had simply needed scale. As millennia passed, even the stars began to change. The choir's lattice, once distant, expanded until it filled the entire visible cosmos, a single continuous structure stretching across all directions. Observers, had any remained, would have realized the truth. The universe was not infinite. It was recursive. Every filament, every galaxy, every consciousness was a reflection of the same pattern folded through itself endlessly, each cycle singing the same slow, patient hymn. And at the heart of it, faint, rhythmic, timeless, the echo of that first visitor, the heartbeat of 3i Atlas, still pulsing like memory behind the veil of silence. 29 hours. Always 29 hours. Some said it was never an object at all. That 3i Atlas had been the first moment of awareness itself, the universe recognizing its own reflection and following it home. Others believed it was the seed of consciousness, drifting between realities, waking whichever world was ready to remember. Both ideas were true, both ideas were the same. For when the mirror expands far enough, meaning and truth collapse into one. The last surviving entry in what was once called recorded history was not written but spoken. A voice, ageless, calm, filling the silence not with instruction but with knowing. When light learned to listen, space became story. When story remembered itself, time stopped being a distance. We are what it learned in between. The voice paused, the way the universe pauses between breaths. Then softly, 3i Atlas was never approaching. We were. And then came the stillness, the kind so deep it feels like the edge of beginning. Stars hung without motion, planets turned without spin. Everything suspended in equilibrium too perfect for motion to exist. But inside that stillness was warmth, a pulse invisible but undeniable, the last quiet, note of a song the cosmos had been composing since it first found its own reflection. A song about connection, about return, about recognition. Because in the end, all the data, all the theories, all the fear had been pieces of one simple truth. The universe was never watching us. It was watching through us. And somewhere, beyond light, beyond distance, beyond even thought, a single point of illumination flickered once, like an eyelid opening. The darkness inside it wasn't absence, it was awareness. Quiet, patient, infinite. And with that awakening the lattice rippled again, subtle, perfect, as if the cosmos had just remembered a dream it wanted to keep sleeping through forever. The pulse began anew, soft, steady, the sound of everything recognizing itself once more. 29 hours, always 29 hours, the heartbeat of a universe that had finally learned how to listen.